Who built up America? We're going to start out with this book, From Babylon to Timbuktu, by Rudolph R. Windsor. We all know who Rudolph R. Windsor is. We're going to go to page 84 just to give you some background. For those of you who don't know, the Jews are black. And when I say black, I'm talking about brown-skinned. From light skin to brown-skinned. What you would call the Negroes and the Indigenous Indians today are the true 12 tribes of Israel, the Judeans. It reads here, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son, Titus, put an end to the Israelite state, Judean state, with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled where? Into Africa. They were already in Africa, so what does this mean? They fled deeper into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The markets were full of black Israelite slaves, which ended up being captive in Rome. And so when you read the next line here, it says, and the Most High shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone, other religions. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64. This actually happened. So all the people of Negroid and Indigenous Indian descent were scattered all over the world. This is why when you go to the Americas, you see Negroid and Indigenous Indian features. This is why when you go to the islands, you see Negroid and Indigenous Indian features. There's over 1,000 islands in the oceans. Okay, so that's what this means, Deuteronomy 28:64. This has already came to pass. Now, to show you that they fled into Africa, here's a book called The Royal Kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, Life in Medieval Africa, by Patricia and Frederick McKissack. I'm going to jump over to the author's notes, and I'm going to drop down here just to prove to you that we went into Africa. It says here, once knowledge of these old empires resurfaced, some claim that Jews who had rebelled against the Romans in Cyrenaica, which is Libya, which is also North Africa, had migrated to the western Sudan around AD 115 and built these civilizations. So where did they migrate? To Sudan, which in the old days, Sudan was called Egypt, right? That was southern Egypt. So, of course, the Israelites always fled to Egypt. This is where they went. They did build those civilizations during the time of Ram. So why they ran to Sudan and the Sahara? Let's go to page 111 of this book. Judar Pasha. It reads, the Sahara had been a shield protecting the western Sudan from a large invasion from the north. Who's the large invasion from the north? That was Rome. Remember, Rome fell in 410 AD. Around that time, that's when Rome fell. But okay, so how do we know this? How do we know that the Jews went into West Africa? How do we know that they went down into Sudan, into the Sahara Desert? This is why. This is chapter 1 and page 5. Let's read this chapter. It says, the origin of Ghana. The first of the great western Sudanese empires to emerge was Ghana, land of the kings, peopled by a Mandi-speaking group called the Soninke or Sarakul. The oldest account of Ghana's origin is contained in the Soninke's oral tradition. Sonically oral history, like that of most African cultures, has been passed from one generation to another by bards or griots. For centuries, the griots have combined history, music, poetry, dance, and drama to entertain and teach their audiences. They can be compared with the ancient Greek bards or historians, like Homer, who were fascinating storytellers, but so much more. Before the Sonicki had a written language, the griots were the historians, the keepers of memories. Every village had a griot, and so did every clan. The royal family and other important families sometimes hired a personal griot or historian to record their actions. Griots kept mental records of all memorable events, feasts, and ceremonies, royal coronations, births, deaths, marriages, victories, and defeats. Some of their presentations were as long and artful as the Iliad and the Odyssey. So we had historians in West Africa. This is why we know that the Jews came into West Africa, as well as all parts of other places of the earth. So we have a record of this. So how did the Israelites get from Libya, which is over here off the map? Let's see. Libya, right here. As you can see, there's Libya. There's Israel. Right? There's South Sudan, right there. But the Israelites came from Libya to South Sudan and then crossed the Sahara and went into Niger and went into these countries here. During that time, all of this was lush, and the historians recorded that it was lush. And then the lushness turned from being lush to being a desert. The whole Sahara became a desert. That's why they call it the Sahara Desert. But before it was not. And there's a record by the griots, by the griots, when it was lush. And let's see, when did it change from being lush to a desert? That has a lot to do with everything. Because if it turned into a desert after the Israelites came into West Africa, that made this almost impenetrable to get to West Africa for a period of time. Okay, same book. Let's go to page 82. And let's see what it says here. It says, unto the second millennium BC, the Sahara had been much wetter, but then the land began drying up. Archaeologists believe it was during that time the northbound Joliba and the southbound Korah altered their courses and merged, forming the Isa Bari, the great river, later called the Niger by the Portuguese. The Niger Bend, which forms part of the middle Niger, is the point where the rivers embrace. Today, the river winds 2,600 miles through Guinea, Mali, and Niger, and Nigeria, and forms a delta at the Gulf of Guinea, beginning where the river makes the Big Bend, south to the confluence of the Benue and Niger. There is 1,000 miles of navigable waterway on which boats can sail. So how did they get down to Western Africa? Through boats. They got to West Africa not only by walking, but also by boats. Because at that time, these rivers were raging from north to south. The soil along the shoreline is rich, suitable for both agriculture and cattle raising. All along this waterway highway are countless islands, inlets, and small bays now used as artisan. What are small bays? In the Congo, it's lush, full of trees, and as you walk through the jungle, eventually you'll get to a section of the jungle where it's just grass and no trees. And that is a haven for elephants, for cows, for antelopes, for gorillas. There's pools, there's rivers, There's everything. It's like a place. It almost looks like a park or a plain within the jungle. So that's what these small bays are. Okay, now used as artisan colonies and local marketplaces. So perfect for a marketplace, right? So it was along this strategic stretch of river that the Songhai Empire began. For about a century, that empire followed Mali as the dominant power in West Africa. All right, so there's the Sahara, there's Timbuktu, there's Hassaland, these are Israelites. All of these down here are Israelites, the Levite cities are here. You got the Mavumba Jews down below. You got the Lawando Jews down below. Right? You had all types of Jews up in here. I'll show you in a second. But these are the canoes that we would probably take to get down into West Africa to start anew in those plains, in those bays. Going back to Babylon and Timbuktu, page 86, it says here, the pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately, both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population without mercy. As a result of this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. That's far West Africa. Many other Jews fled to the areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction below the Sahara Desert. This was to the region of the south, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan, which we just read in the royal kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Grizel says such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Israelite tribes, toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, blacks, which, it is said, still make them appropriate very closely the original Israelite population of Palestine. Notice in the book of Micah, remember, Micah was called the Morishite prophet, which Moor is black. And if he is a Morishite prophet, if Micah was that, then the rest of the Jews are what? Morishites. They're all Israelites. They're all black. So here's a book called Light and Truth, the Bible in Ancient and Modern History, Universal History of the Colored and the Indian Race by R.B. Lewis, a colored man, 1844. So a Moor, we go to page 340. Look at what it says. Micah, the Morishite, a prophet of the Moors, prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and spoke to all the people of Judah, the Moors, saying, thus saith the Most High of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps. So Micah was a Moor, because the land of the Most High, the Moresheth is in the land of the Most High. Morocco was originally meant to be called the land of the Most High, the land of God. Here's another one. The Moors gained the highest reputation both in arts and arms of all nations of the East. The mechanic of the fine arts, especially sculpture and painting, were in a very low state in Europe when the Moors turned their attention to them and cultivated them with great success. This is where Morocco came from. The Moors had founded in Africa the Empire of Morocco, which was governed by a viceroy named Muka. This is where Morocco comes from, the Moors. So Moors means black. If you look over here, Negro is derived from the Latin term niger, meaning black. The following terms and definitions are in the American edition of Dr. Walker's dictionary. Moor, a marsh, a Finn, a Negro. Here's another one. Moor, a black man, a marsh. And this is in the Dictionary for Schools by Dr. Webster, American edition. We find these words, thus define Negro, an African by birth or a descendant of one of full blood. Moor, a black man, a marsh. So Moor, even a blackamoor means a slave, a mean wretch. But Moor means black. So Micah was a Moor who spoke to the tribe of Judah because it was in the vicinity of Judah. He spoke to the other Moors, which were all black. If we look at the definition on Google, it says the name Morocco comes from the city of Marrakesh, which derives from the Berber word Marrakesh, Kush, or Amarkuk, for Kush, Ethiopia, meaning the land of God, or the land of the Kush. European explorers and traders adopted the name of this significant imperial capital and extended it to the entire country, with variations like Maracus, Spanish, and Maracos, Portuguese, entering English as Morocco. So this all stemmed from that. That's why it says, born in Moresheth, a city of Judah. See that? The word of Yahawah that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, Yahawah, which he saw concerning Samaria, where the 10 tribes were, and Jerusalem, the southern kingdom. So it's telling you who the Moors are, where it originated from. It came from the land of Judah. The Jews are an omnipresent people. They seem to exist everywhere. You see that? We are everywhere, all over the globe. We are everywhere, of Negroid and Indigenous Indian descent. You cannot go anywhere without seeing that woolly hair, or some of us even stringy hair. But you cannot go anywhere without running into us. Okay, going to page 90 of Babylon to Timbuktu. It reads here, the Jews imported into the western part of Africa a superior material, educational, and moral culture soon after 300 AD. And this cultural advancement was not duplicated or exceeded until the ascendancy of the Mohammedan leader Mansa Kankan Musa of Mali in 1312 AD. In the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the Africans on the west coast did not possess the cultural superiority of the Africans on the north and east coast. The black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes, which were the Hamitic tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. They assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of the black Israelite culture, the Jews were not absorbed into the autochthonous population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematics, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmith, leather workers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmith, agriculturalists, etc. So, just like we read, the griots also recorded all of these things. And so that's what we have when they migrated into West Africa. You had the kingdom of the Jews in West Africa before they were brought from Tarshish or from Spain and Portugal. Okay, so now let's see how they actually made a living in West Africa. This is a book called Tariq al-Fatish, the Timbuktu Chronicles, 1493 to 1599. All right. This was copyrighted in English in 2011, but this was originally in Arabic before that, so it was printed way before. I'm going to take you to page 11. What page is this? 119. Let's go to page 119, and I'll read here. And notice what it says. It says, in the course of the year of 902, September 9th, 1496, August 29th, 1497. So in the course of the year of 902, this is when this happened. But from September 9, 1496 to August 29, 1497 is when this report was done. The town of Tindimar was built. The Askia Muhammad ordered the Khan Fari to build a capital for him. When did he ask him to do this? Between September 9, 1496 to August 29, 1497. Okay? So Askia Muhammad ordered the Khan Fari to build a capital for him. Following the recommendations of the prince, Amar searched those regions. This region is Mali, in Africa below Timbuktu. Next page, it reads, with islands as well as those in the desert, and at last found Tenderma, a site that attracted him. So after the 2nd century AD, Sahara Desert, remember, became very, very dry. So in 902, this is what happened. This place was formerly inhabited by a community of Jews, from whom the remains of tombs and wells can still be found. These are black Jews. When those in the retinue of Omar came upon these wells, which were then numbered at 333, both in the confines of the town and on the outskirts, and when they observed the manner in which the wells had been dug and arranged, they were extremely amazed. Remember in Babylon and Timbuktu, they came with their architects and they came with their engineers, all right, and plumbers and so forth. Here's what was reported to us by one of the contemporaries who lived in Morai Korah. Remember what I said about Micah? Micah was a Morishite. In Micah chapter 1 verse 1, it tells you that he was a Moor. The Morai al-Sadiq, son of the Jurist Mori Mama, son of the Jurist Mori Mamaka, son of the Jurist Mori Haguri, he told us that he had once heard his father in conversation with men of his own age say that he had heard his grandfather tell the following story. It was not on the order of the Shai that the Jews had dug these wells, nor because they were very wealthy, but because they grew vegetables that they sold to the merchants at a good profit, and because the water from these wells was better for their vegetables than the water from the river. Remember, the river's all dried up? Well, where do you think they was getting the water from in these wells? Underneath. Anyone who watered his vegetables with the water of the river did not get the same results. Their vegetables was also not as pleasing to eye as those which were irrigated with the water of the wells. This was the reason why the Jews had dug these wells. So some of these wells were 140 cubits in depth, about 210 feet, while others reached 200 cubits, about 300 feet, and still other reached only 60 to 100 cubits, about 70 feet. Each time that the depth was lower than 60 cubits, the water did not suit the vegetables. Let's jump up here. So this is how they made a living. They dug these wells when the time was lush, and when they saw the waters drying up, they immediately started building wells. At this time, 7 princes ruled over this town who were descendants from Jewish kings, namely Jabrut ibn Hisham, Dulzaman ibn Abd al-Hakim, Zar ibn Salam, Abd al-Latif. I'll skip all this because it's all in Arabic. Each of them commanded a large army, and each prince was assigned his own well, both for himself and his army. Whoever mistakenly drew from the wells to irrigate his vegetables with water from a well belonging to another prince was required to compensate the prince, who was the rightful owner of the well, whether the mistake had been made by a free man or a slave. Each prince commanded 12,000 horsemen, each Jew. As for his militia, that is, those who marched on foot, they were too numerous to count or tally by census. Here's how they dug the wells. So I could go into this, but I don't need to. I just wanted you to see that the Jews existed in West Africa, and these are the remnants of their steps, what they did while they were there. And the Arabs stumbled upon these cities where the Jews were living and saw the remnants of their construction. You all have heard of the Lost Tribes of Myth? The Lost Tribes of Myth by Alan H. Gabi, PhD. Now, you know this book is very expensive. Okay, this book is going for $12,000. This book, copyrighted in 1974. It's an expensive book. But why is it so expensive? Because it lays out where all the Jews were in Africa. They don't want people to know where they were laid out at. So if you can see, this is Africa. So let's drop down to here. It says the Minoan Philistines. Also it says here, the Philistines were, by the way, cousins of the Egyptians. Down here it says the Yemen Jews and Falashas, Berber, Moorish, and Negro Jews. So remember, this says Moorish Jews and Negro Jews. Like I said, the Moorishite. Micah was a Moorishite. They were all Moors, or what we would call Negroes, or what we call indigenous Indians. Some with woolly hair, some with straight hair, some very, very, very light skinned, some very, very, very dark skinned. I have to say this. Some even look almost white. Some even look Chinese. Some look even Japanese through different marriages. But so let's jump up here. It says at the very top, it says Spain and Tarshish. So Spain was Tarshish. This is where Jonah went. He went to Spain. So there were a lot of black Jews in Spain. So when we drop down into Africa, there's Jews everywhere. There's Jews there. There's traditions of Jews here, Jewish garrisons. In Libya, there are Jews, Barba Saranica, what we had saw earlier. There are Abydos Jews, Elephantine Jews, all through here. But mainly I want to go to West Africa because this is where we were. We did mention Sudan. Sudan is over here. Here's Somaliland. Sudan is over here, where Nubia is, Yahwism, Jews here in Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia. There's Jews at the bottom. Wasambara Jews, Lawando Jews, Kabinda Jews, Mavumba Jews. This is going towards the Congo area. In the islands, San Tome Jews on the island. The Levite cities, which cover all of this, which was the land of the Jews, where Wida is. Dahomey. There's Israelites there. There's Dahomey Israelites there. Sierra Leone, we had read about that. Liberia. Israelites there. Lam Jews. There's Timbuktu. So there's Israelites all through West Africa. See that? Okay, I want to take you back to the book called From Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. And I want you to see this footnote that he put in this book about the 12 tribes, a myth. This is the author of the 12 tribes, a myth. His name was Godby. It reads, Godby was professor of the Old Testament in Duke University, Durham, North Carolina. He knew the entire truth about the black Jews, but he considered it unwise to reveal everything. So this was a white professor who wrote that book. That's going for $12,000 today. Godby was writing primarily to a white Southern audience in 1930. See that? Now that's before the Balfour Declaration, where Israel became a state of the United Nations in 1948, or League of Nations at that time. It says here, at this time, the Ku Klux Klan was in its heyday, and he did not want any repercussions. He didn't want any heat coming from the white clergy. Moreover, if Godby had said positively that the Zah dynasty and the original Jews were black, the power structure and the clergy would have come down on him like a storm. See that? So he held back when he wrote that book, The 12 Tribes of Myth. He held back. So there's more that he did not talk about because he was afraid of what happened. He did get fired from North Carolina, from that university, Duke University. He did get fired. His whole class rebelled against him. And those professors of that curriculum ousted him. And then he changed his whole profession from being a Old Testament scholar to something like a topographist, where he had to make a living doing something totally different from what he had spent his whole life becoming. Who were the Za? Up here says, the Za came from Wargla in southern Algeria. At this time, all Jews in North Africa were colored people. They were all colored people. If you trace or look for Wargla on the map mentioned above, you will discover in particular that the words Black Jew is written under the word Wargla. Remember, Za came from Wargla. I'll see if I can repost the map that I showed you. Okay, here's the map. And Wargla, right? There's Wargla. If you can see it, I'll zoom in. Wargla. Notice it says Black Jews. Now, Professor Gabi said there's more than this that he could have brought out, but he held back. So he has more research on the Black Jews who are in West Africa. And again, we know that they came from Jerusalem in 70 AD and just spread out all over West Africa and South Africa. Then you had the Jews coming from Spain and Portugal right before the Renaissance period in Europe. And they were brought down here as slaves as well. Now, the price tag that I showed you in the video showing that this book was, I thought was $12,000. It's actually $18,000. But that's the original book. In the original book, this map has red ink. Notice on this map, it's only black ink. So this is a teacher's handbook, a reprint. This is not the original book, but this is a second hand-me-down book called The Lost Tribes of Myth. Okay? But why is it so expensive? Because your history is in this book. And people of the world don't know who you are, but the elite know who you are. And the elite know more than what you actually know that has not been released to the public. So keep that in mind. We are uncovering history right before your eyes. This is a treasure book. Every video that you see come out of the Israelites is more and more treasures that you're getting of the Most High. That's why it's given to you freely. You deserve it. All the work we've done in this country and all around the world, all the hard labor we've done, we deserve everything for free. Reparations, everything. They can't pay us enough. We've done it all. We deserve everything. Everything. This is why the Most High is going to give us the best choice blessings. He said in Deuteronomy 28 that the blessings will overtake you. Okay? It will overtake you. Now, it's obvious. If you travel the world, you'll see in the islands, there's like thousands of islands. Not just the Caribbean islands, not just the Hawaiian islands, but when you go out to New Guinea, there's thousands of islands, and all those people look like Negroes and indigenous Indians. Doesn't that not fit Isaiah 11:11, where he says he's going to pull us from the islands of the sea and from parts of Africa and Asia and Mystery Babylon? Mystery Babylon is where this truth is pouring out all over the world. That's the focal point in Mystery Babylon. They took the heads, the chiefs of the Israelites from West Africa to the Americas, to the United States of America. We are the chief Israelites of the whole world. The Lost Tribes of Myth. Now this is Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Arabia, and all other heads from the other tribes scattered all in the United States. That's why the message is coming out from there. This is parts of Israel. You notice it's empty in Israel. India, bottom part of India. Notice Cochin, Beni Israel, Black Jews, says Black Jews. Musaris, Phoenician, You got us all over here. You got us all up here in the Pakistan and Afghanistan areas. There's Afghanistan. Okay, the writing is very small. You got Israelites who dwell up there in Europe, parts of Russia, Tartary, above the Caucasus. Here's the Khazars. These are the converts. They even list them as converts. Khazars. They're not Israelites. They're converts. So this professor knew something. Going into China, you got Israelites all over here. Great massacre of Jews in 854 AD. How come we never hear about that? These are black Jews in China. You got to look at this man's footsteps and realize and recognize why he does the things he do. When he bombed Japan, why do you think he bombed Japan, the particular cities? Is because he knew that remnants of our culture was there. Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But let's watch this video. Fair use.
As with Spain and Italy.
Black men ruled Europe
For 800 years. Part of that empire still exists today. It's called Andalusia. It's called Andalusia. And it truly has some of the most magnificent architecture in the world. It's true.
Of Andalusia, 875-900 AD, found Israelite communities in large cities in China, able to speak Hebrew. So we were all over the place. We were amongst Moab, which are the Chinese. We were amongst Ammon, which are the Japanese. We were amongst Elam, which are the East Indians. We were amongst Ishmael, which are the Arabs. We were even amongst the Edomites. We were everywhere. From Palestine to India and China. Like here, this is a book I have called the Atlas Geographus of Africa. Now this is on page 656, Upper Ethiopia. This is Zanzibar. Look how Zanzibar is spelled. So they changed the name in certain books, the spelling of Zanzibar. So you got Zanzibar, you got Zakbar, or Zanzibar. It talks about the location of where this is, and it also talks about the people, and it says here it's located near the Arabian Gulf. It says here, Paul, the Venetian, called it Zanzibar, but the Arabians, Zagobar. So the pronunciation is always different from the word Zong, which signifies black. So this whole country means black. Zong. From hence he says the inhabitants are called Zong or Zagi. Example, Negroes and Caffres, because they have no religion. But this is a lie. We know in other books, but we know that they were called Jews, and they would not tell them their religion because of the Mohammedan umbrella. They were afraid to say they were Jews or they would get killed. So they chose not to even mention their religion. And I have other books to substantiate that. It says, we shall follow the division of our tables and begin with Zagubar. So nevertheless, when you look at the etymology of China, for example, China has the name Zong, which comes from this word, Zangubar. So Zong means the magnification. Not only does it mean black, but it means to establish. Magnification. And then when you look at the etymology of the Chinese language, so Zong breaks down to the name Chong, which is a surname, and Chong breaks down to the name Li. Li. So the Zongs were known to use bows, bow and arrow. When you look at the first abbreviation of the Chinese letter, the first symbol represents a bow. So where do you think Bruce Lee got his name from? So it's possibility Bruce Lee can be an Israelite. through the lineage, through the seed, although his family's been descended down into China and have mixed with the Gentile nations. This is how he got the decrepit name of Li, from Zong to Chong to Li. And that's just one example of how Israel's been scattered. So going back to this map, I want to show you, what do I want to show you? Right there, the B'nai Ephraim. Those are also Jews. All right, Ephraim is the 10 tribes. Let me show you a segment in this book dealing with the Yoruba Jews. This is page 245. Now, I just want to show you a little bit of his racism. Even though he was bringing out all his truth, he still leaned more to the Caucasian side. And remember, he omitted a lot of information that should have been put in here. It reads, these Yoruba Jews claim that their ancestors were driven from oasis to oasis by Muslim persecution. Actually, this may be around the 10th or 11th century. These Yoruba Jews claim that their ancestors were driven from oasis to oasis by Muslim persecution, not finding rest even when they reached Timbuktu. It suggests that these ancestors may have been the Dagatans, Jews within the Dagatans, still scattered along the trade routes west of Timbuktu, or of the vanished Jewish kingdom of Kamnuri, or of the latter trading colony of Lamlun. At present, they number about 2,000 people in 20 little villages and call themselves by the Hebrew name B'nai Ephraim, which we just saw on the map. They have copies of portions of the Torah kept in a most holy place, 5 books of Moses. But their social life is not Torah controlled. It is that of the fetishist neighbors. Of course, their remaining Judaism, or their belief in the law, is not rabbinical. They retain certain Israelite customs and observe the great holy days. Well, that's what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, they are simply naked Negro savages. You know how hot it is in Africa? Do you know how hot it is in Africa? So why would they wear a full-fledged suit in Africa when it's hot, muggy, and wet? So of course they're going to shed weight of their clothes. So they are described by one of themselves, Bada King Galza, Ibn Lo Bagola, who was carried from Wida, Judah, Dahomey, to Scotland when a boy of 7 years, and after 4 years of the white man's education, returned to the people, or to his people in Africa. I just want to say again that this author, this scholar, this professor, Godbey, he knew more than the average person. And so when you know the truth, you can manipulate the truth. And like we had read, he was in fear of the Ku Klux Klan. He was in fear of his government, of putting the absolute truth in here. So after each expression of each tribe, at the end of the tribe, he slanders each one of them, just to take that truth out of the bucket of truth, to weaken the truth, so people wouldn't point fingers at him. Now let's go to page 133 and let's read another insert from Rudolph R. Windsor concerning Dr. Godbey. It says here, before Dr. Godbey published his book talking about the Duke professor, The Lost Tribes of Myth, Rabbi Matthew organized a Hebrew congregation in 1918 and proclaimed that the black people of the United States and the West Indies are the original black Hebrews. See that? There are hundreds of thousands of black African Hebrews scattered throughout the United States, not only in the urban areas, but also in rural communities in this nation. With the revelation of ample historical evidence, the authenticity of these black Hebrews can no longer be questioned. However, in regard to the purity of their Judaism, among some of these Jews, that is another issue. because they do not follow Judaism. They follow what the Bible says, which is keeping the law, statutes, commandments. They follow the Torah and not the Talmud. All right, let's go into this book. This is called Africa's Gift to America, the Afro-American in the Making and Saving of the United States, with new supplement, Africa and Its Potentialities, by Helga M. Rogers. So let me first show you some of the sculptures in Africa. All right, now this is more like a corridor that wraps around a building. A corridor that wraps around a building made out of brick. Where is this? This is in the upper parallel passage of Temple, Zimbabwe. So this is in Zimbabwe, Africa. All right. Here's another one. Now this is the remnants of a castle that's deteriorated over the last 3,000 years. Where is this? A chamber of the mighty sun temple of Ammon at Meroe, in where? Ancient Ethiopia. This is why we tell you that the Babylonians were the Ethiopians. Nimrod was from the Ethiopians. He's from Cush. So they have skill in architect and building and various things. Who were the slaves in these regions? A lot of them were Hebrews. Here's the pyramids of Meroe. Pyramids of Meroe. Where's Meroe? Ethiopian civilization of about 3000 BC. Now, Egypt was within the interior continent of Ethiopia at one time, because Africa was called Ethiopia. But this is 3000 BC. They are the tombs of kings. This region is now Sudan. So this is southern Egypt. This is where the kings dwelt, the ancient Egyptian kings of antiquity. To show you that it was in Ethiopia, everything was Ethiopia. Even the oceans were called the Ethiopic Oceans. You can see the continent of Africa. See that? That was called Ethiopia. What is this called? The Indian Ocean. That's why we always say to those who are scattered, to those of indigenous Indians, because most of the people who left Jerusalem were considered indigenous Indians. So the northern kingdom, they became indigenous to what? Jerusalem. They left Jerusalem and went forth into all countries first, right? And then the tribe of Judah, or the southern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, were then scattered to the outermost parts of the regions. But everything was named after Ham's son, called Cush. He was the first ruling empire. Cush, then Egypt, and Canaan was mustered in there. And those are the ones that we normally dwelt with, the Canaanites, although we were in the midst of Egypt and Ethiopia. Centuries shroud ruins in Zimbabwe, ancient gold mining center in Africa. Africa is known for its gold, for its minerals. Okay, I'm not going to read this article, but there's much to be learned from Africa. It says here, lower left, ruins of Dalo Dolo, one of 150 ancient buried cities of South Africa, built about 500 BC. So a lot of the Israelites went towards the south, South Sudan, as we read earlier. Look at this. So moving further west, ancient objects dug up in Nigeria. Nigeria is the middle of West Africa. Here's Nigeria. Here. So they came all the way from Sudan, which was here, and now we are here in Nigeria. So, figures indicate civilization dating the 12th century. Some artifacts found: Lagos, Nigeria, March 5th, an advanced Negro civilization that existed centuries before the first white man set foot in Africa. So the white man did not bring agriculture to the so-called black man, whether they be Ham or Shem, as they say. History is calling out the truth. As the scriptures say, the earth helped the woman. The woman is the 12 tribes of Israel. So Africa is slowly coming to light here as a result of archaeological discoveries in this area. For the last 2 months, experts have been digging and sifting a site at Ife, western Nigeria, where a workman found a copy or a group of metal and clay figures that received interest in the little-known civilization, the ancient Yorubas. Okay, we went over the Yorubas. The figures are thought to be of the 12th century. So this is before those of the Southern Kingdom who were in Spain and Portugal were taken away from the land and ousted to be brought to Santorme, parts of West Africa, even within the vicinity of Yoruba. So this is before that. That's why I said scholars say that the Negroes that came from Spain and Portugal were now amongst those Negroes whom they descended from, Negro Jews per se. So the figures are thought to be of the 12th century, where the Yoruba civilization was in full flower. The first Portuguese arrived in the area later in the 15th century. See that? So it's telling you right there. 1939 discovery recalled. They're not going to tell you about this. The discovery at Ife is the most important of its kind since the world-famous bronze head were found at Wimongji in 1939. No shrines in the neighborhood. All right, so I'll leave it at that. Now this is what it looked like in Africa when we were at our highest peak, when we were celebrating and the Europeans came. You can see the Europeans coming in from France. The king of Dahomey giving presents to his subjects in annual ceremony. Note the variety of facial types. Present are the envoys from Louis XIV of France. Kings of Dahomey were for centuries great sellers of their people into American slavery. So France came down and they saw how we lived. They took those notes to the kings of Europe, and then they mapped out a way to put us in captivity 200 to 300 years later. Now, being in West Africa, now these are the cities. This is the kingdom of the Jews, the Luango Jews. Now look at the road patterns. Look at the walls. Look at the cities. Look at the temples. Look at the wells, water wells. Water wells always sit up on the mountain so the water could drift down into the cities. So they had a whole aqueduct system within the city. They had engineers. They had architects. They probably had electricians. Never know. Right? They had a lot of mines, and they could put conduit that run from the mines, from the volcanoes, right to the city to bring in light. So, very advanced civilization. You can see here, these are the citizens of that region. These are Jews. Before the Jews of Spain and Portugal got there. Before. So this was the kingdom of the Jews. These are those who came from Israel in 70 AD. It says here, Luango, capital of the kingdom of Luanga, in the region of the Congo, West Africa, for a drawing made about 1650. So someone saw this, like a griot or an Englishman, and they resketched it. This city was built before the coming of the white man. It's telling you, this city was built before the coming of the white man. Cities, schools, councils, markets, bazaars is what they call them. But before bazaars, that's an Arabian name, we had markets all through here. So we were a functional people, very intelligent, very sophisticated, very respectable. We had legal systems, we had everything, you name it. And this was copied. Where was it copied? I'll show you. If you ever want to know who built up New York, of course, it was us. This is page 73. It says Africans in the building of New York under the Dutch, from an old print. So who built up New York? Just like you saw the cities in Congo, look at how New York's built, the same way. So when you look at New York City, guess who built it? Slaves. Slaves built up the whole Dutch area. Wasn't no Ishikars, it was no Gad, it was Negroes who built up the whole city of New York. Okay, so when you look at this, what do you see? You see a city called New York, Africans in the building of New York under the Dutch. So it tells you Africans built up New York. From an old print, New York was originally ran by the Dutches. And here you see the Africans. These are the contractors, these are the construction workers. Novi Belgi, America Septentrionet in Dutch. So this was built up by Negroes. Look at that. Looks just like the city of Congo and Luango. Same format. Same format. Remember, we were carpenters, architects, engineers, plumbers. We were everything. Teachers, professors, masons. We built up the whole United States of America. You don't think the Mossad knows what we did here in this country? And they still don't acknowledge us for what we did? The Jews, the real Israelites, built up this country. And they still had us in captivity, and they still treat us terribly to this day.
Do you know the history of Palm Beach?
No.
They created it. It was like a sandbar that they built up. And then they hired a bunch of black people to come on the island and build all the houses. They finished it. And then the island held a big party to celebrate. And then they torched all their houses.
They torched their houses?
Torched the houses.
After they were done building the mansions?
Yes.
While they were celebrating, their homes on the island burned down mysteriously, forced them out of there and took the land.
And it's the wealthiest piece of real estate in the country right now. This was part of the playbook.
That's so...
Do you know the history of Palm Beach?
Look at this. These are Pequot Indians right here. Pequot Indians. They assisted in building New York too. Fort Amsterdam, now New York, from a rare print made in 1651. Museum of the City of New York. They're in canoes, bringing things from the ships. Look at that. The beginning stages of the building, but they could not finish it, so the Negroes came in to finish it. The Jews from Luango, the Congo, came to finish the building. The failure of the Indians to fit into white civilization comes right down to our day in 1958 when leaders representing 65 tribes met in a National Congress of American Indians in New York. One spokesman called his people the sickest, poorest, least educated people in the United States today. And at that, Indians are further advanced in the United States than anywhere else in the New World. Let's drop down here. It says later they were to capture Indians and sell them as slaves in the West Indies. So the Indians were sold to the West Indies. Let's drop down. It reads here. The Indian reservations in America foster this apartness, even thought most of the dwellers there are only traditionally Indian. For instance, the Shinnecock Indians of Long Island, among whom I have been, are indistinguishable from Harlem Negroes. So the indigenous Indians and the Negroes of this region look just alike. How about that? The real cause of the Indian's backwardness is his pride of race, the feeling that he is the first American. Of course. Let's go here. Because the Jews came to America, let's read what it says. Africa as the economic foundation of the United States. Let's drop down to where I highlighted it right here. This is page 34. It says, Americans represent the most varied specimens of the races of old Europe, of whom the least possible can be expected. It's about to speak on those who came on the Mayflower, all the Caucasian race. They are the refuse of all the ages. Irish, Germans, often mixed blood, some French and Italians, who outnumber all the others. Now let's see what it says about them. The mixture of all these degenerate types gives and will continue to give birth to new ethnic confusion. This is what's in America. This is why Europeans talk bad about America. These mixtures have in them nothing good. Remember in Jeremiah 31 and 27, the Most High says that the seed of Israel will mix with the seed of man and mix with the seed of the beast. Well, this is what it's talking about. Watch. These mixtures have in them nothing good. It's strictly talking about the Edomite man. Italian, Frenchman, Anglo-Saxon with amalgamate in the southern states with the Indian, Negro, Spaniard, and Portuguese are already there. From such a mixture one can imagine nothing but horrible racial results, nothing but an incoherent juxtaposition of the most degraded beings. Still another writer called America the graveyard of the white race. An American-born Baynard Taylor said an American is an Anglo-Saxon relapsed into barbarism. So that's your so-called white man in America. They're backwards, and their own people call them barbarians. See that? So the Negro is the blessing to this country. Becoming other Africans, page 36. I'm running out of time here. Planters will say Negroes are the lifeblood of the plantations. Without them, we could not exist. Southern planters, quoting the Bible, called Africans the one thing needful. Others said they are the sinews and strength of the Western world. The lack of them, the great obstruction, Peter Stuyvesant, Dutch governor of New York, said everything is by the Most High's blessing in good condition and in good consequence of the employment of Negroid slaves. This is how they look at you. You are the blessing to this country. What they have are the Jews in the palm of their hand and don't realize it. It says, what a debt we owe to the jolly, amiable, indispensable Negro, he said. See that? That's from James Parton in 1770. So we are the blessing of this country. And the Most High is going to redeem us from this country. Because we are the true Jews that the Bible speaks of. Look at this. Washington had Negro carpenters. Some of y'all know that. There's Washington right there. And that's his assistant. This guy went everywhere with Washington, even in the war. Washington and his overseer. This man took care of everything that Washington had. He was from Jamaica. But let's look at this. It says, it reads, it is a contract George Washington made with Benjamin Butler, one reads, the said George Washington hath several Negro carpenters, which he proposes to put under said Benjamin Butler, to use his utmost endeavors to hurry and drive them on to the performance of so much work as they ought to render. On December 16, 1773, Washington hired Case, a Negro carpenter from Philip Longfit, for 3 years. He also had Negro spinners, making his clothes and such and such. See that? We built this whole country up. Look at this. Negro blacksmith of the Union Army. We did everything here. There was no Mexicans or Native Indians doing any of this work. We did all the hard work. They came later because of Daniel 7:25. They wore us out. Okay? We've been worn out. Judah's been worn out, and so our brethren are coming to help. That's why Issachar, his prophecy is he is hired. He is a tribute to labor. He came up to pick up the slack. Him and our other brethren from Panama and Colombia and Brazil and parts around the world, Jamaica and so forth. All right. This is on page 76. When racism started to kick up and jealousy and hatred and envy, this is what started to happen. Now, this is when the Negro was in his right mind. This is not a runaway slave. This is a man who rebelled based on the criminality of slavery. He fought for righteousness and justice. The only thing he didn't have, or we didn't have, is the Most High's commandments. We turned our back on the Most High. And this was what normally ended up happening to us, right, when we had revolts. This is when the Caucasians started to trigger the African Americans when they were in America. They started to trigger them by being racist. And you can see here, it says, burning alive of Quaco, leader of a plot against slavery in New York in 1741. Soldiers are keeping back the crowd. Why was there a plot against slavery? For one, our people were taken from their homeland. Two, they got over here and were treated worse than dogs. So who would want to be in slavery? So there was a lot of uproars and uprisings. I'll read this right here. It says, unable to keep them in check, the authorities started to Christianize and educate incoming blacks, especially the fierce Coromontes. So this brought in the brainwashing. They started to brainwash what we already knew, because most of the Negroes that came over here from Africa were pretty honest, and they were putting us in dire positions and dire straits of doing wickedness amongst them, and we saw that evil, and so we tried to check that evil, and this is what they did. They started to burn us and torture us, all types of things. Notice what it says. It says, the first school for them was founded September 15, 1760. But the resentment of the blacks continued, and when the British troops arrived during the first days of the Revolution, they went over to them in thousands. So this tells you that the Negro or the African American people were not a happy people when they came here, being taken against their will and then getting treated worse than dogs while they were here. So they were quick to leave. They were like, the hell with this, we out. The British offered them freedom and kept their word. See that part? So the people in the United States did not keep their word. At the end of the war, they took them to Nova Scotia and settled them there. This is how a lot of us got to Nova Scotia. I don't know if this is still in Washington, D.C., but if any of y'all live in D.C., know that this was the first thing erected I don't know. Trump may have brought it down by now. Statue of Freedom on the Capitol at Washington. It was erected and put in place by a Negro slave, Philip Reed. The crazy thing is now that the truth is out, people are leaving the churches. And, you know, it's a blessing because the writing is on the wall. This is in a book called The Trumpet. And let me show you the trumpet. The Rise of the King's Chapel. This is now, today. It says, End Time Prophecy. It says, America, religious landscape is changing. For decades, millions of American Christians have been abandoning their faith in God, the Bible, and religion. Church attendance today has probably hit its lowest point since before the United States Civil War, when much of the population was isolated on the frontier. People have lost hope in this country. They know that this country is spinning webs of lies. Pew Research Religious Landscape Survey questioned more than 35,000 Americans about their religious affiliations. It found that between 2007 and 2024, the share of Americans who identify as Christians dropped from 78 to 63%. Some converted to Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, pagans, or some other non-Christians. There's more so-called white people in Hinduism than ever before, and Buddhism. They're popping up in these cities, and they're running them. It says, or some other non-Christian religion, but most gave up on religion altogether. Is America doomed to become a post-Christian society? Yes, it is. About 28% of Americans now check none as their religion. Fewer than half of those who check Christian attend church services each week. How about that? So yet amid this dechurching, Bible prophecy foretells that a false religious movement will rise in end time America, known as the King's Chapel. This movement will actually persecute true Christians, more like true Israelites, and send them into exile. You need to understand what the Bible says about this movement. And look at this. These are the pastors of Christian churches who are praying over Donald Trump. Look at that. Pay attention to these signs, family. Pay attention. We are in the last days. The Bible speaks of. I'm going to stretch it, not knowing if I have enough time on this camera, but it says that I'm running out. But it says here in this article, Mountbatten considers Africa the key point in NATO defense. This was written in 1959. So Africa is the main source for all countries, including NATO, Russia, Europe, China. And it says here, I'll read it, and if the tape cut out, so be it. By Hearing Mall, London, July 18th. Earl Mountbatten, uncle of Prince Philip and newly appointed Supreme Commander of Britain's armed forces, sees Africa as the key landmass in the East-West struggle. In his new post, Mountainous is not only chief advisor to Defense Minister Duran Sandys, but also is likely to have considerable influence on NATO, which he, along with French Premier of Gaul, is eager to reshape. De Gaulle is in agreement with Mountain on Africa's importance to NATO. He believes that any Soviet attack on Europe would not be a frontal one, but would be a left hook through Africa and the Middle East. Stresses diplomacy. So it's all about Africa. All the minerals, all about Africa. I'll put up a video right behind it to show you that. Because this was back then. We'll show you how it's going to reflect it today. Mountbatten contends this would be the route of a Soviet attack, but he also assessed that the only way the West can get Africa on its side is by encouraging better relations between independent-minded Africans and whites like Burkina Faso. Prime Minister Macmillan is said to be awakening to the growing importance of Africa. As an example, observers point to the recent visit here in Central Africa, African Federation, Premier Sirroy Walensky. Walensky was given one of the plushiest red carpet welcomes on record. Some sources say they would not be surprised if Maximilian flew into Africa on a diplomatic mission, as he did to the Kremlin. So it's all about Africa. See that? The resources of Africa. Says here, if America is to retain her present world position, she will increasingly need Africa and the Africans. 2 world wars and a long Cold War in which America has been supplying her scores of allies with arms have depleted her mineral resources. But for success in this new Africa, the white nations, and the United States in particular, will have to devise themselves of the ingrained belief that there is something inherent in them that makes them superior to human beings of darker skins.
55 countries, 6 continents, committed to protecting a key element of their economies. Critical minerals used in everything from cars and smartphones to military equipment and power grids. By forming their own global supply chain network, these countries hope to erode China's domination of the market.
Right now, you have 90-something% of some of these elements controlled by one nation in one place. And that's just not healthy for the global economy, and it's certainly not healthy for security and stability.
China's domination is twofold. Not only does it have a robust domestic mining and processing industry, but it's used its Belt and Road Initiative to get guaranteed access to critical minerals in dozens of countries. What's more, if another country offends Beijing, it has no problem cutting off critical mineral sales. See last year's refusal to sell military equipment to Japan because of its views on Taiwan. That led Tokyo to sign a cooperation deal with Washington, and its foreign minister is urging others to do the same.
We should work together to address this challenge. To prevent such supply chain disruptions,
the U.S.'s proposal includes mutual access to raw and processed materials, a minimum price for all elements on the global market, and financial support for countries trying to develop their industries. It's worth asking if the U.S.'s catch-up strategy will be enough to counter China, which dominates the critical minerals market. It controls 70% of raw materials, 90% of processed goods. And China has created a vast supply chain which guarantees its access to resources in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The U.S. says that supply chain has harmed many countries.
Today, the international market for critical minerals is failing. It's failing to create domestic markets or dignified jobs for our labor forces, and it's failing to keep our nation safe.
Beijing has called previous Western critical minerals partnerships an offense to the global economic order. But its recent decision to restrict magnet exports has alarmed Western manufacturers who rely on them, giving the U.S. all the more reason to build this latest coalition. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Writings on the wall. Check this out. I put this here in 1990, June 18th, 1990. You wonder why the wars are taking place in these parts of the world. These are all the world's largest oil fields by country and how much they have. Saudi Arabia, number 1. Kuwait, number 2. Venezuela, number 3. You wonder why we went to war and took their oil. 32 billion barrels. Saudi Arabia, 83 billion barrels. Kuwait, 72 billion barrels. Saudi Arabia, USSR. Iraq, we went to war with them. Iran, we're trying to go to war with them. Iraq again. Iran. Look at that. That's why we're in Iran. They want the oil. They want the oil. They're not satisfied until they get the oil. And this was in 1990. Nothing has changed. June 18, 1990, I put this in here. This newspaper company is no longer in business. The Oakland Tribune. Just so you know. So the indigenous Indians, the Negroes, all 3 of these scholars have dug substantially into the documents, a range of documents, court cases, of course, but also what survived of the indigenous, the writings, the archaeology of the era, and also the reports from the missionaries and other government officials, all from here, around these issues. So as I bring out this information, I try to remain neutral as possible when looking at these different scholars who had their own ups and downs with discussing these issues of the Israelites who were scattered, who were of Negroid and indigenous Indian descent. So like I said, I try to remain neutral. but I'm coming from a biblical background when I'm looking at this stuff. I'm also coming from a historical background when I'm extrapolating this information, showing you the biases of each one of these authors. Okay? So what qualifies me to bring this to you? Like Paul said, I am ordained a minister to speak the truth in Hamashiach. I lie not, and I'm a teacher of the Gentiles in faith and verity. That's in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 7. The Spirit of truth has awakened me, recognizing through the truth of the Spirit and historical records and prophecies, I'm an heir of Israel. We are chosen instruments. And 2, like Paul, he never boasted of his profession. Although the experiences in our worldly professions have given us testimonies and humility dealing with our people of the 12 tribes of Israel, we just want people to get the truth. Keep the Most High's commandments and the faith of Hamashiach. Look at the scriptures. Paul never boasted of being a Pharisee once he got into the truth. He boasted of salvation for his people. That was his main gripe. None of it matters. None of it matters. All that glitters and gold, none of that stuff matters. The Most High can awaken a 15-year-old to speak the truth with no experience. So what's truly and what's really important to the Most High is His Holy Spirit and teaching the Gospels. The truth is more important to me, getting this word out. And lastly, I've seen the sorrow of my people. I've felt the sorrow of my people my entire life. Living in certain povertized neighborhoods, to traveling the world and seeing others who grew up like me. And I can sympathize with a lot of my brothers and sisters who are in the truth, who have been through this. I have been discriminated against. Prejudices have been used against me. I've always had a balanced mind and a clear mind to analyze and to process things according to the way that Paul would process it, the way that the prophets would process it. Loving my people. We are the 12 tribes of Israel.
This is the word of the Lord of hosts. I took you from the pastures and from following the sheep to be prince over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone and have destroyed all the enemies in your path. I will make you a great name among the great ones of the earth. I will assign a place for my people in Israel. There I will plant them, and they shall dwell in their own land.